Growing up, it was just Mom and me. Dad disappeared when I was just a child, leaving behind little more than a faded memory. Mom worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to keep us afloat and make sure I could focus on my studies. Thanks to her sacrifices, I secured a scholarship that allowed me to complete college without the hefty debt that's so common nowadays. I majored in business management, driven by a mix of ambition and the fear of being as financially strapped as we were when I was younger. After graduation, I moved to the city. It was a tough start, living in a cramped apartment and subsisting on ramen more often than I'd care to admit. But I soon landed a job at a large firm, starting as a junior and quickly climbing the ranks. Fast forward a few years, and I wasn't just working there anymore. I was running an entire department. It was more than just a job to me, it was my domain. And I made sure everyone on my team felt valued. You've got to lead with respect, I would say during training sessions for new hires. Treat this role as if you own it, and soon, you won't just be part of the team, you'll be leading it. My team was solid, a group of great people. When I got promoted to head the department, we celebrated at a local bar. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy spot with cold beers and lots of laughter. Here's to Erica, the boss lady. Marco, one of my oldest colleagues, raised his glass. The others joined in, the clinking of glasses echoing over the buzz of the bar. Thanks, guys. We're all in this together. Here's to kicking more ass and taking names, I shouted, and the team roared back in approval. That night, amid the back slaps and cheers, I noticed him, Jake. He saw me watching and walked over with a grin that could knock you off balance. Couldn't help but notice the celebration. What's the occasion? He asked, leaning against the bar. Just a little career boost. I'm the new head of my department now, I said, trying not to sound too boastful. That's impressive. Must be a tough job, he replied, nodding appreciatively. I'm Jake, by the way. Erica. Nice to meet you, Jake. Our conversation turned more serious than I had planned. It turned out Jake was in finance, with numbers being his forte just like project plans were mine. Over the next 6 months, casual dates turned into weekends spent together, and before long, I was spending more time at his place than my own. His apartment was amazing, high ceilings, a view to brag about, and a warmth my dingy rental couldn't match. One evening, as we overlooked the city lights from his balcony, Jake turned to me, his usually playful face now serious. He took my hands, the nervous energy in them palpable. Erica, these past months with you have been the best of my life. This may seem fast, but when you just know, right? His voice was filled with a mix of certainty and hope. I nodded, my heart racing. He pulled out a small box from his jacket, revealing a ring that caught the light perfectly, almost as brilliantly as his eyes. Will you marry me, Erica? Yes, Jake, absolutely yes. I managed, my voice thick with emotion. Just like that, I was engaged to a man who truly saw me and loved every part of me, even the tough ones. The day I was supposed to meet Jake's parents, my stomach was in knots as Jake drove us to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment block. I realized then that these folks weren't just wealthy, they were loaded. Stepping out of the car, I felt the weight of the place. The house looked like something out of an old British movie, all brick and ivy, with gargoyles staring down like they knew I didn't belong. Jake squeezed my hand as we approached the massive oak doors. You'll be fine, Erica, he whispered, but his voice sounded as if he was trying to convince himself, too. The door swung open to reveal Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. His suit probably cost more than my rent, and her dress looked like something from a magazine. The foyer was enormous, with a chandelier overhead that sparkled like a constellation and walls lined with portraits of stern-looking people with titles like Sir and Lady. Erica, lovely to finally meet you.
I'm Cheryl.
And this is my wife, Eleanor, Mr. Hargrove said, his voice smooth yet cool, with a hint of an English accent that seemed practiced. Mrs. Hargrove gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Please, too, I managed a greeting, trying to steady my nerves as we entered the dining room. Jake whispered hurried advice about which fork to use, but his words were a blur in my mind. Dinner was served, and it felt like sitting in a freezer, the air thick with judgment. Mr. Hargrove gestured to a portrait of a stern man with a bushy beard. "That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, a direct ancestor from England who settled our family here in the 1800s, he announced with pride. "Really impressive," I responded, attempting to sound enthusiastic, but it was challenging to eat with the feeling that every move was scrutinized. I reached for what I believed to be the salad fork, but the ensuing silence indicated my mistake. I glanced at Jake for assistance, but before he could whisper anything, Mrs. Hargrove interjected sharply. "Perhaps things are done differently where you're from, dear." Her words were cutting and precise. "Sorry, I'm still getting used to all this," I mumbled, my cheeks burning. Jake attempted to smooth things over with a story about us, but his parents seemed more intent on watching me struggle with the dessert spoon. With each course, I felt smaller, their stares weighing on me. After the chilly dinner, we moved to the Hargroves' spacious living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more stifling than the dining hall. I sank into one of the ornate chairs, feeling like an exhibition in a museum about commoners. Mrs. Hargrove, poised elegantly on her seat's edge, probed, "Erica, dear, tell us more about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours." I hesitated, sensing Jake's tense gaze. "Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was young, and I don't remember much about him. My mom raised me on her own. She's a nurse." The room fell silent. Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor like a scream. "This is unacceptable," she declared, her voice filled with disgust. "We're descendants of an ancient English lineage. We have standards and traditions. I cannot, will not, allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her lineage." Mr. Hargrove, who had been quietly observing, spoke with calculated words, each one heavy. "It's crucial our family ties are strong and well documented. Erica, can you even name your great-grandparents?" My face heated with embarrassment. "I only know my maternal grandparents," I whispered. Mr. Hargrove rolled his eyes in contempt. "This is exactly what we feared," he muttered. Jake finally spoke up, his tone firm yet pleading. "Mom, Dad, please. Erica is kind, hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what matters?" His mother's gaze was unwavering. "Respect and adherence to our family standards are what matter, Jacob. If Erica is to join this family, she must learn our ways and respect her origins, even if they seem insignificant." Their words stung, cutting through the warmth of earlier in the evening. Yet Jake looked at me, pleading silently to comply. I nodded reluctantly, agreeing to their terms. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll learn about your family and your traditions." Mrs. Hargrove appeared somewhat appeased by my concession. "Good. Start by acquainting yourself with our family tree and understanding the portraits. It's not just about names, Erica, but respect for our lineage." As they continued discussing their expectations, I felt part of me wither. The evening had shifted from a simple introduction to a trial by fire. I agreed to their demands, but at what cost? As the room filled with discussions of ancestors and noble deeds, I felt alienated from these people and, strangely, from the parts of Jake so connected to them. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I scarcely had time to breathe, juggling work with the etiquette and style courses Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove demanded I take. My days started before dawn and ended late in the evening, leaving me feeling like a zombie, elbows off the table. During one of our etiquette classes, Erica, the instructor, gently reminded me, "Remember, the soup spoon moves away from you when you scoop." I nodded, trying to mimic her actions, but my thoughts were distracted by the mountain of work waiting for me at the office and the endless wedding preparations. "You're doing well," she reassured me with a soothing voice. "These things take time to become second nature." I smiled weakly. "Thanks, it's just a lot right now, you know?" As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. I excused myself, stepping outside into the bustling city to take the call. "Hi, Mom," I greeted, sounding more tired than I intended. "Erica, darling, how are the wedding preparations going?" she asked, excitement and a hint of concern in her voice. I paused, not wanting to worry her. It's all good. Learning a lot. Even picked up the waltz, I said, trying to sound upbeat. She paused, knowing I wasn't entirely convincing. You sound exhausted, honey. Are you getting enough rest? Remember, this shouldn't be so hard. You need to take care of yourself. I chuckled weakly. I'll try. Mom, but there's a lot right now. Etiquette classes, dance lessons, work, and wedding planning. Just remember what's important, Erica. You and Jake at the end of the day. Not all these rules and lessons. Her words were a balm, but as soon as we hung up, the weight of reality settled back on my shoulders. I was caught in a tug-of-war between pleasing Jake's parents and keeping my sanity. Every day felt like a never-ending marathon. Back inside, I continued my training, the instructor's voice droning as background noise while I practiced holding a wine glass correctly. In rare moments of downtime, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if all this was worth it. The constant scrutiny, endless classes, and the disdainful looks from Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove whenever I erred, which was more often than I cared to admit. One evening, as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed. It was Jake's message lighting up the screen. How was your day? Miss you. I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to tell him everything, my frustrations and fears, but I held back, responding simply, miss you too. Long day, but all good. Putting down the phone, the silence of my apartment felt overwhelming. Was this how it was going to be? Pushing through the exhaustion, smiling through the stress, all to fit into a world that felt increasingly alien. Finally, the big day arrived. The venue was bustling with flowers, elegant dresses, and the notable faces of high society. Nervously, I stood in my long, flowing white dress, trying to breathe. My mom came over, adjusting a stray curl. Everything will be all right, Erica, she reassured with a soft smile. I wanted to believe her, but once the ceremony began, any hope for a peaceful wedding vanished. Jake's parents were on a superiority spree. Mr. Hargrove greeted guests boastfully, while Mrs. Hargrove made sure everyone knew they made everything possible. As guests settled, I tried to mingle but was pulled aside by Mrs. Hargrove's frosty smile. Erica dear, make sure our friends are looked after. Fetch some drinks like a good girl. She gestured towards a group of elderly men loudly discussing politics. But I started, only to be stopped by her sharp gaze. No buts. You're practically family now. Show some initiative. She snapped. Reluctantly, I carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, my dress trailing like a servant's garb. I caught glimpses of Jake, laughing and chatting, oblivious to my plight. As I served another round, I overheard Mrs. Hargrove's voice rise above the din. Erica will serve us tonight. It's good practice for her, don't you think? Her tone condescending, eyes seeking approval. That was the final straw. I approached her, my hands trembling but my voice firm. I am not a waitress at my own wedding. There are staff here for that. Mrs. Hargrove stood, her face feigning surprise. You should be grateful we let a simple girl into our family. Remember your place, Erica, she hissed, her words like daggers. I felt a mix of emotions, frustration, anger, and a deep sense of being out of place that I felt a surge of anger flood my cheeks. This is my wedding, not a show for your friends, I retorted, my voice louder than I intended. The room went silent, and all eyes were on us. Jake, who caught the end of our exchange, stumbled slightly with a champagne glass in his hand. What's going on here? He asked vaguely, not fully focusing his eyes. Your mother is treating me like a servant at our wedding, Jake. This isn't what today is supposed to be about, I expressed, frustration bubbling over. Jake glanced between me and his mother, confusion and irritation clouding his expression. Erica, why are you making a scene? Just do what my mom asks. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal, Jake. This is our day. And your mom is ruining it, I replied, disbelief and hurt mingling together. He took a deep sip of his champagne before responding. Look, Erica, you should feel lucky. I even chose you. There were many girls better than you. Prettier, richer. You're making a fuss over nothing. His words hit like a physical blow. I recoiled, the realization dawning on me that the man I loved, the man I intended to marry, didn't see us as equals. To him, I was merely another accessory to be shaped into the perfect image his parents desired. As I clutched my bouquet tighter, feeling as though I might crumble right there, my mom came over. She looked at me and pulled me into a hug, the kind that seemed to hold the world at bay. "Honey, do you love this man? Do you really want to marry him?" she whispered, her voice filled with worry. I shook my head, barely able to muster my voice. "No, Mom, I can't do this. I don't want to." Mom nodded, her jaw set in that determined way I knew well. She gently took the bouquet from my hands and led me to a chair, her touch reassuring. Then, with surprising agility, she approached the DJ, took the microphone, and faced the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Her voice rang out, cutting through the murmurs and drawing every eye in the room to her. There was a hush, the kind that precedes a storm. She took a deep breath and turned directly to Mr. and Mrs. Harrove. "I have something important to share about truth and pretense," she began, her gaze unwavering. "I attended the same school as Charles and Eleanor Harrove. Back then, they didn't have English accents or claim noble blood. Their families were hardworking folks just like ours." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Charles's father was a mechanic, and Eleanor's mother worked as a waitress at the local diner. She paused, letting her words sink in. The portraits, the accents, the surname, they bought them all to craft a past that concealed their true origins. The room erupted into whispers, guests turning to stare at the Harroves, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Harrove stood, her face flushed, the facade of aristocracy melting away. "That's absurd, but my mom wasn't through. To think you would base your judgments on my daughter's worth over a lie. Erica is worth 1,000 of your false titles. She is real, something you long forgot how to be." The guests were now openly murmuring, their fascination turning to disdain as they gazed at the Harroves. Mr. Harrove tried to speak, his accent slipping into something less polished and more desperate. "We did what we thought was best." "For whom?" my mom interrupted fiercely. "For your son, for society, or for your own shallow pride?" The confrontation had captured everyone's attention, and now the room was abuzz, charged with tension and revelations. The Harroves seemed to shrink, their grandeur dissolving into the air, leaving only the stark truth of their origins. Jake's face twisted with a mixture of shock and anger. He stomped up to me, his voice barely above a hiss as he leaned in close. "You've ruined everything, Erica. You've disgraced my family, and now you're questioning if I want to marry you after the spectacle?" His words stung, but before I could respond, he grabbed my arm, pulling me slightly closer. "I'll teach you how to be a good wife, one who knows her place and obeys." His threat hung in the air, heavy and chilling. I pulled my arm back with all my strength, stepping away from him. The room was deathly silent, everyone's eyes on us. This was the man I had intended to marry, and this was the family I was supposed to join. No, this couldn't possibly be my life. I inhaled deeply, feeling my mother's earlier strength surge through me. "There will be no wedding," I declared loudly, ensuring every guest heard. "I regret ever considering marrying someone whose arrogance and deceit are a perfect match to his parents." Murmurs filled the room, some shocked, others supportive. Jake stood there, mouth agape, as if trying to catch the words and shove them back into my mouth. My mother came to my side, her presence a comforting shield against the chaos. Together we walked through the crowd, our heads held high. In the ensuing weeks, news of the Harrove family's disgrace swept the city. Their fabricated lineage and high society status crumbled like a house of cards in the wind. Those who once revered them now crossed the street to avoid the shame. They sold their mansion and moved away, seeking a fresh start where their past wouldn't haunt them. As for Jake, I heard snippets, rumors of a downward spiral. Nights spent trying to drink away the scandal. I didn't know if they were true, and frankly, I didn't care. He had shown his true colors, and they were too dark and twisted for me to ever want to look back. "Thank you, Mom," I said to her one evening as we sat in our modest living room, a stark contrast to the opulent falsity I had almost married into. "For everything. For being there, for standing up for me, for helping me see the truth before it was too late." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll always be here, Erica. You're my daughter, and I raised you to be strong and true. No man, no family, can ever make you less than what you are." We sat there, the TV chatting in the background, a normalcy that felt refreshing. I had lost a fiancé, but regained my life, my self-respect, and more importantly, my future. After the whole wedding fiasco, returning to work felt like entering a sanctuary. My colleagues, who had heard about the chaos, were nothing short of supportive. "Erica, you dodged a bullet, girl," Marco said as soon as I walked into the office. He was leaning against my desk, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, which he handed to me as a peace offering or perhaps a welcome-back gift. "Thanks, Marco. Feels good to be back," I replied, taking the coffee and savoring the familiar bitter warmth. "And yeah, that bullet was more like a cannonball," Jenny chimed in from her cubicle across the way. "Anyone who makes you serve guests at your own wedding is no husband material. You deserve way better, hun." I smiled, grateful for the camaraderie. "I think so too. It's nice to be back where I'm appreciated for what I do, not for the family I might have married into." As the days turned into weeks, the support from my team didn't waver. It was during this healing time that I met Brian. He was a friend of a friend, nothing fancy about his background. Just a genuine guy with a quick smile and an easygoing nature that was infectious. We met at a small get-together. It was low-key, just a few friends hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. He was there, laughing at something silly when I walked in. "Hey, you must be Erica," he said, standing up to greet me. "I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I promise." "Thanks, Brian. I hope they didn't embellish too much," I replied, trying to match his easy demeanor. We hit it off instantly. His family was the polar opposite of the Haro family. The first time I met his parents, they welcomed me with warm hugs and genuine smiles. "Erica, we're just glad Brian found someone who makes him so happy," his mom said, pulling me into a hug as soon as I stepped through their front door. It was refreshing, the simplicity of it all. No pretenses, no demands, just mutual respect and acceptance. Brian and I weren't rushing anything. We were taking our time getting to know each other beyond the surface level. Back at work, my boss called me into his office one day. "Erica, I just want to say we've all noticed how you've handled everything. It's not been easy, but you've managed to keep your performance top-notch." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We think it's time for another promotion. You've proven you can handle just about anything, and your leadership has never wavered." Leaving his office, I felt a surge of pride. With a new relationship developing, a career on the rise, and the respect of those I cared about, I was finally in a place where I felt I belonged.